What happens when two of Hollywood's most beloved personalities sit down for what should be a heartwarming conversation, only to have it spiral into one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television history? The tension between Valerie Bertinelli and Drew Barrymore reached a boiling point that nobody saw coming, and what started as friendly banter quickly turned into something far more serious. Before we get into exactly what was said that made Valerie walk off that stage, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on in this whole situation. Because trust me, you're going to have opinions. The atmosphere in the studio that day seemed normal at first. Drew Barrymore, known for her warm and effusive interviewing style, welcomed Valerie onto her show with the kind of enthusiasm that has made her program a favorite among viewers looking for feel-good content. Valerie walked out with a smile, waving to the audience, looking relaxed in a casual but stylish outfit that reflected her down-to-earth personality. The two women embraced, and Drew gestured for Valerie to take a seat on the colorful couch that serves as the centerpiece of her set. Drew started with what seemed like a softball question, asking Valerie about her recent cookbook and how she has been enjoying her time focusing on food and wellness. Valerie's face lit up as she began talking about her passion for cooking, describing how being in the kitchen has always been therapeutic for her, especially during difficult times. She spoke about the importance of nourishing yourself, both physically and emotionally, and how she has learned to be kinder to herself over the years. Drew nodded along, seemingly engaged, before pivoting to a topic that would set the tone for everything that followed. With that characteristic head tilt and curious expression, Drew said, I think what's so beautiful about your journey is how open you've been about your struggles, especially with your body image and your relationships. I feel like we've all watched you go through so much in the public eye. Valerie's smile flickered slightly, but she maintained her composure. Well, I think transparency is important, she replied carefully. I've always believed that if sharing my story can help even one person feel less alone, then it's worth being vulnerable. Drew leaned forward, her enthusiasm building. Absolutely. And speaking of vulnerability, I have to say, when you were going through your divorce, the way you handled everything on social media was so raw and real. Some people thought maybe it was too much information, but I personally loved how unfiltered you were. The air in the studio shifted almost imperceptibly. Valerie's posture stiffened just a fraction, and her response came with a slightly cooler tone. I shared what I felt comfortable sharing at the time. I think there's a difference between being authentic and oversharing, and I've always tried to be mindful of that line. Drew, either not sensing the change in energy or choosing to push forward anyway, continued with growing animation. But that's the thing, right? Like, where is that line? Because I feel like in this day and age, people want to see everything. They want to know you're real, that you're messy, that you're going through the same things they are. When you posted about discovering your ex's infidelity, that was such a moment of feminine rage that we all connected with. Valerie's jaw tightened visibly. She took a breath before responding, and anyone paying close attention could see that she was choosing her words very deliberately. Drew, I appreciate what you're saying, but I want to clarify something. Those moments you're referring to were some of the most painful experiences of my life. They weren't content. They weren't me trying to create a moment or connect with an audience. They were real emotions during a real crisis, and while I don't regret being honest, I also don't think they should be characterized as entertainment or something to celebrate. The audience, which had been relatively quiet up to this point, seemed to collectively hold their breath. Drew's expression showed surprise, and she let out a small laugh that sounded more nervous than amused. No, of course. I totally get that. I wasn't trying to minimize your pain at all. I just meant that, seeing someone like you, who's been in the industry for so long, just being so human about everything, it was refreshing. Valerie's eyes narrowed slightly. Refreshing, she repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. I find it interesting that my trauma is refreshing to people, that the worst moments of my personal life are seen as refreshing content for others to consume. Drew's face flushed, and she quickly tried to backtrack. That's not what I meant, Valerie, and you know that. I think you're twisting my words a little bit here. I'm trying to compliment you on your bravery and your honesty. Are you, though? Valerie asked, her voice remaining steady but gaining an edge. Because what I'm hearing is that you, like so many others, feel entitled to comment on and analyze the most painful parts of my life as if they're storylines in a show. There's a real person behind all of this, Drew. Real heartbreak, real betrayal, real pain. And reducing it to something that's refreshing or great content really diminishes what I actually went through. Drew looked genuinely flustered now, glancing toward her producers off camera before turning back to Valerie. Okay, I hear you, and I'm sorry if I came across as insensitive. That genuinely wasn't my intention. I think maybe we're having a miscommunication here because I really do have so much respect for you and everything you've been through. Valerie nodded slowly, but her expression remained guarded. I appreciate you saying that, but I think this is part of a larger issue that we need to talk about. This idea that celebrities, especially women, are supposed to bare their souls for public consumption. And then we're praised for it when we do. But if we set boundaries, we're called fake or accused of not being relatable enough. It's an impossible standard, the audience murmured in agreement, some nodding along with Valerie's words. Drew shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly not expecting the conversation to take this turn. I think that's a really valid point, she said, and obviously there's a balance. But I also think, and tell me if you disagree, that there's something powerful about sharing our struggles because it does help other people. Like when I've talked about my difficult childhood or my addiction issues, it's been healing for me and hopefully helpful for others. Valerie's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. And that's your choice, Drew, and I think it's wonderful that you found healing in that. But the key word there is choice. What I'm trying to express is that sometimes the way the media and even other people in the industry talk about these vulnerable moments, it feels less like we're being given a choice and more like we're expected to perform our pain for an audience. And if we don't, or if we push back against how it's being discussed, then we're the problem. Drew took a sip of water from the mug on the table beside her, clearly using the moment to gather her thoughts. I really don't want you to feel like that's what I'm doing here today. This is meant to be a safe space where we can have real conversations. A safe space, Valerie echoed, a hint of skepticism in her voice. Drew, we're on national television. There are cameras everywhere. There's an audience watching. This is literally the opposite of a safe space, and I think that's part of the problem. We call these intimate conversations, but they're not intimate at all. They're public, they're recorded, they're edited, they're clipped for social media. Nothing about this is actually safe. The tension in the studio had become palpable. Drew looked like she wanted to move on to a different topic, but Valerie seemed determined to make her point. Drew cleared her throat and attempted to steer the conversation in a different direction, but the damage had already been done, and the atmosphere remained thick with tension. Well, let's talk about something more positive then, Drew suggested, her voice taking on an overly cheerful quality that felt forced. Your cookbook is absolutely beautiful, and I love how you've incorporated family recipes and personal stories into it. Can you tell us about your favorite recipe in the book? Valerie paused, seeming to consider whether to let Drew change the subject so easily. After a moment she responded, but her tone suggested she wasn't quite ready to move past their previous exchange. I appreciate you asking about the cookbook, but I don't think we should just sweep what we were discussing under the rug. I think this is actually an important conversation to have, especially on a show like yours, that positions itself as being authentic and real with guests. Drew's smile faltered. Of course, I don't want to sweep anything under the rug. I just thought maybe we were making you uncomfortable, and you might want to talk about something else. What makes me uncomfortable, Valerie said, leaning forward slightly, is not the conversation itself, but the pattern I'm seeing here. You brought up my divorce, my social media posts, my pain, all under the guise of complimenting me on my authenticity. But when I push back on how those things are being framed, suddenly you want to change the subject and talk about recipes. Do you see what I'm saying? You want access to the pain, but you don't want to deal with the reality of what it means to actually go through those experiences. The audience was completely silent now, watching the exchange with rapt attention. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, while others seemed riveted by Valerie's willingness to confront Drew so directly. Drew's face showed a mixture of emotions: hurt, defensiveness, confusion, and something that looked like anger beginning to simmer beneath the surface. Valerie, I really feel like you're being unfair to me right now, Drew said, her voice taking on a slight tremor. I've been nothing but supportive of you. I've championed your work. I've defended you in the press. And now you're sitting here basically accusing me of exploiting your pain when all I was trying to do was acknowledge your strength and resilience? Valerie's expression didn't change. I'm not questioning your support or your intentions, Drew. What I'm questioning is the system we're all operating in. And yes, that includes this show. You say you want to have real conversations, but real conversations mean being able to push back when something doesn't sit right, even if it makes things uncomfortable. Real conversations mean being able to say, hey, the way you're talking about this very painful time in my life doesn't feel good to me, without the other person getting defensive or trying to redirect. Drew's hands moved in animated gestures as she spoke, a sign that she was becoming more agitated. But I did apologize. I said I was sorry if I came across as insensitive. What more do you want from me here? Do you want me to grovel? Because I honestly don't understand what I did that was so terrible. I asked you about things you've already publicly discussed. It's not like I ambushed you with some secret information. That's exactly the problem, Valerie shot back, her voice rising slightly for the first time. Just because I've discussed something publicly doesn't mean it's fair game forever. Just because I shared something during a vulnerable moment doesn't mean I want to rehash it in every single interview for the rest of my life. There's this assumption that once you've opened up about something, it's permanently available for public consumption and commentary, and that's exhausting. Drew shook her head, visibly frustrated now. Okay, but then why did you come on the show? You had to know we were going to talk about your life. That's what this show is. We have conversations about people's lives, their journeys, their experiences. If you didn't want to discuss any of that, then maybe this wasn't the right venue for you. The words hung in the air, and Valerie's face showed a flash of something between hurt and anger. Wow, she said quietly. So now it's my fault for coming on your show and expecting to be treated with basic sensitivity and respect. I thought we were going to talk about my cookbook, my career, the things I'm actually working on now, not just dissect the most painful moments of my past for entertainment value. Drew's voice took on a sharper edge. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, Valerie. We can talk about your current projects and also acknowledge the journey that brought you here. That's what makes for an interesting conversation. Nobody wants to just hear about recipes for an hour. They want to know the person behind the recipes, and that means talking about your experiences, good and bad. There it is, Valerie said, a bitter smile crossing her face. Nobody wants to hear about recipes. In other words, my actual work, the thing I'm here to promote, isn't interesting enough on its own. We need to add some trauma, some drama, some pain to make it worth people's time. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Drew threw her hands up in exasperation. You're putting words in my mouth now. I didn't say your work isn't interesting. I said people want the full picture. They want to know you as a whole person, not just as someone promoting a product. And honestly, I'm starting to feel like you came here with an agenda, like you wanted to pick a fight about the media or about interview culture, and you're using me as your target. Valerie's eyes widened. An agenda? Drew, you're the one who started asking invasive questions about my divorce and my social media posts. You set the tone for this conversation, not me. I simply responded honestly when those questions made me uncomfortable, and instead of hearing me and adjusting, you're now accusing me of having an agenda. This is gaslighting in real time. The word gaslighting seemed to hit Drew like a physical blow. Her face flushed a deeper red, and her voice rose in pitch. Gaslighting? Are you seriously accusing me of gaslighting you right now? On my own show, when I have been nothing but kind and welcoming to you from the moment you walked out here? This is unbelievable. What's unbelievable? Valerie countered, her own voice rising to match Drew's, is that you can't seem to accept any criticism or feedback without making yourself the victim. I expressed discomfort with how you were discussing my personal life. And instead of just acknowledging that and moving forward, you've spent the last several minutes defending yourself and telling me why my feelings are wrong or unfair. That's not what accountability looks like. Drew stood up abruptly, startling both Valerie and the audience. You know what? I don't have to sit here and be attacked on my own show. I invited you here as a guest, as someone I admire and respect, and you've turned this into some kind of lecture about everything I'm doing wrong. If you're so uncomfortable being here, then maybe you should leave. The studio went deadly silent. Even the crew members who had been subtly moving around in the background froze in place. Valerie stared at Drew for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she stood as well, gathering her composure with visible effort. "You're right," Valerie said, her voice eerily calm now. "Maybe I should leave, because clearly we're not having the same conversation. You think I'm attacking you, and I think I'm trying to have an honest dialogue about something that matters. Those two things can't coexist in the same space." Drew crossed her arms defensively. "If you want to leave, no one's stopping you. But I think you should know that walking out is going to look really bad. People are going to wonder what happened, why you couldn't just have a normal conversation like every other guest who comes on this show." Valerie let out a short, humorless laugh. There it is again, the threat. The implication that if I don't play along, if I don't perform the way you want me to, there will be consequences. Do you hear yourself, Drew? Do you hear how manipulative that sounds? "I'm not being manipulative," Drew insisted, but her voice wavered slightly. "I'm being honest. Walking off a talk show in the middle of an interview is dramatic, and people are going to talk about it. That's just reality." "Let them talk," Valerie said, reaching down to grab her purse from beside the couch. Valerie straightened up, purse in hand, and looked directly at Drew with an expression that mixed disappointment and resolution. "You know what the saddest part of all of this is? I actually thought this was going to be different. I thought coming on your show, talking to someone who has also been through public struggles and personal pain, would feel different from the typical media circus, but it's not different at all. It's the same exploitation wrapped in a prettier package." Drew's arms remained crossed, but her defensive posture seemed to crack slightly. "That's not fair, Valerie. You can't just make these sweeping statements about my show and what I'm trying to do here. We've had hundreds of guests, and they've all had positive experiences. Maybe the problem isn't the show. Maybe the problem is that you're projecting your frustrations with the entire industry onto me. Or maybe," Valerie replied, her voice sharp, "those other guests were just better at playing the game than I am. Maybe they smiled through the discomfort, answered the invasive questions, performed their trauma on cue, and walked away feeling hollow inside but knowing they did what was expected of them. I'm just not willing to do that anymore. I'm at a point in my life where I'd rather walk away than compromise my boundaries." The audience members exchanged glances, some nodding in understanding, while others looked confused about how to react. Drew glanced toward her producers again, and one of them made a subtle gesture. But Drew shook her head slightly, indicating she wanted to continue handling this herself. "So what are you saying?" Drew asked, her voice dropping lower, taking on a more serious tone. "That everyone who comes on this show is fake except for you. That I've built my entire career on making people feel exploited. Because that's essentially what you're implying, and it's not only insulting to me, it's insulting to every guest who has trusted me with their stories." Valerie sighed, and for a moment, she looked tired rather than angry. "I'm not saying they're fake, Drew. I'm saying that the entertainment industry has conditioned all of us, hosts and guests alike, to believe that intimacy and exploitation are the same thing. We've normalized this idea that the more pain you share, the more relatable you are, the more successful you'll be. And when someone like me pushes back against that, suddenly I'm difficult or ungrateful or projecting. But maybe I'm just finally being honest about how uncomfortable this whole system has always been." Drew uncrossed her arms and took a step closer to where Valerie was standing. "Look, I get that you're uncomfortable. I hear that. But can we just take a breath here and try to find some common ground? Because I really don't want this to end with you walking off the stage. I don't want that for you. I don't want it for me. And I don't want it for everyone watching who came here expecting something uplifting and instead got this conflict." "That's exactly my point, though," Valerie said, gesturing toward the audience. "You're more concerned about how this looks, about the optics, about what people watching are going to think, than you are about actually hearing what I'm trying to tell you. You want me to stay and smooth things over so that we can pretend everything is fine? So that your show doesn't have to deal with the aftermath of a guest walking out? But that would require me to ignore my own feelings and my own boundaries just to make things more comfortable for everyone else. And I'm done doing that." Drew's face showed genuine emotion now, her eyes glistening slightly. "You think I don't care about how you feel? I do care, Valerie. I care a lot. But I also think there's a way to express that you're uncomfortable without turning this into a public referendum on my character and my show. You could have pulled me aside during a commercial break. You could have said something to the producers beforehand. Instead, you chose to do this here, in front of everyone, and that feels intentional." Valerie shook her head slowly. There wasn't a commercial break. Drew, you went straight into those questions about my divorce and my social media posts without any warning. And even if there had been an opportunity to speak privately, why should I have to hide my discomfort? Why should I have to protect your feelings and your show's reputation more than I protect my own peace of mind? That's the whole problem right there. Women are always expected to manage everyone else's emotions, to smooth things over, to make sure nobody gets upset, even when we're the ones being hurt. The audience murmured again, and this time it was clear that many of them were sympathizing with Valerie's perspective. Drew seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy, and her expression grew more desperate. Okay, you're right, Drew said, her voice breaking slightly. You're absolutely right. I should have been more thoughtful about how I approached those topics. I should have asked if you were comfortable discussing them before just diving in. I made assumptions, and that was wrong. I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry. Can we please just sit back down and start over? We can talk about whatever you want to talk about. Just the cookbook, just your current projects, whatever makes you feel comfortable. Valerie studied Drew's face for a long moment, seeming to weigh whether the apology was genuine or just another attempt to salvage the situation. I appreciate you saying that, she finally said, but I don't think starting over is possible at this point. Too much has been said. We've both revealed how we really feel about this dynamic. And I don't think we can just put that back in the box and pretend to have a pleasant conversation about recipes and cooking tips. Drew's shoulders sagged. So that's it? You're just going to leave? After everything we just said, after I apologized, you're still walking out? I'm not leaving to punish you, Drew, Valerie said softly. I'm leaving because I need to. Because staying here and continuing this conversation, when we're clearly not understanding each other, feels worse than walking away. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for the other person is to recognize when a situation isn't working and remove yourself from it. Drew wiped at her eyes quickly, trying to maintain composure, but you have to know how this is going to be perceived. They're going to say you stormed off. They're going to make you look unstable or difficult. The headlines are going to be brutal. Let them be brutal, Valerie said with a shrug. I'd rather be portrayed as difficult for standing up for myself than be seen as agreeable for swallowing my discomfort. I've spent too many years of my life worrying about how I'm perceived, about whether people think I'm nice enough or easy enough to work with. I'm tired of that version of myself. If this is what difficult looks like, then I'll own that. Drew looked around at the audience, at her crew, at the cameras still rolling, capturing every moment of this unprecedented situation. I really wish this had gone differently, she said quietly. I had such high hopes for this conversation. So did I, Valerie replied, and there was genuine sadness in her voice. But sometimes our hopes and reality don't align, and we have to deal with what actually is rather than what we wanted it to be. I hope you can understand that, even if you don't agree with my decision to leave. Without waiting for a response, Valerie turned toward the stage exit. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply remain quiet. Drew stood frozen in place, watching Valerie walk away, her expression a mixture of hurt, confusion, and something that looked like dawning realization. As Valerie reached the edge of the stage, she paused and turned back one more time. For what it's worth, Drew, I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're a product of the same system we're all trying to navigate. I just hope that this conversation, as uncomfortable as it was, might make you think differently about how you approach these topics with future guests. That's all any of us can do, right? Learn and grow and try to do better next time. With those final words, Valerie walked off the stage, leaving Drew standing alone in front of a silent audience and millions of viewers who had just witnessed one of the most raw and unscripted moments in daytime television history. Drew stood there for several seconds, clearly unsure how to proceed, before finally turning to the audience with a shaky smile. Well, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I think we all just experienced something very real and very unexpected. I need a moment to process everything that just happened. The cameras kept rolling as Drew sat back down on the couch, her professional facade finally cracking completely as the weight of the confrontation settled over the studio. What should have been a lighthearted conversation about cooking and personal growth had instead become a referendum on celebrity culture. media exploitation, and the price of authenticity in an industry that claims to value it above all else. The moment captured something that rarely gets shown on carefully produced daytime television. The genuine clash of two perspectives, the reality of hurt feelings and miscommunication, and the courage it takes to walk away from a situation that isn't serving you, regardless of the consequences. Whether Valerie was right to leave or should have stayed and worked through the conflict would be debated for weeks to come. But one thing was undeniable. She had started a conversation that extended far beyond that studio. One about boundaries, respect, and what we really owe each other when we sit down to have these so-called authentic conversations.